the Virtual Center interface. I think you're going to really enjoy this particular nugget because it's kind of where we've been leading to over the last series of nuggets all the way up to this point. We've taken our time and slowly working our way into the enterprise level of VMware. We've started with Workstation and we developed some of the concepts and skills that you need to know and involved with the desktop version of VMware. And we've taken that and moved into ESX and we've talked to us about some of the starter edition stuff and then we added in a lot of the storage area network stuff. And now we're moving into some more of the enterprise features of VMware, which is really kind of the compelling reason why I think you're probably interested in virtualization and VMware's solution for virtualization. Now that we've got our virtual center set up, now that we've got our virtual infrastructure ready to go, we can now make use of the interface for Virtual Center. We can talk about all the neat and nifty things that you probably read about and heard about and want to take advantage of. In this nugget, we're going to talk about a series of kind of miscellaneous topics. We're going to look at the interface, and we're going to look at kind of the pieces of the interface that we're not going to talk about in the later nuggets. And in this piece, we're going to show you really what you need to know about the interface. We're going to talk about, hosts and clusters, which is where you're probably going to spend most of your time. We're going to talk about some new license features and some of the things that you may need to enable, like vMotioning. We're going to talk about VM configuration and how you need to set up or how you can set up your VMs and how you can configure your VMs, and also the startup and shutdown information for VMs as well. We're going to talk about tasks and events and how you can configure some scheduled tasks that will allow you to perform certain actions at certain times of the day. And then we're going to talk about a really cool feature, which doesn't have a lot of utility, but it's kind of a neat gee whiz thing, and that's VM maps and how the system can automatically generate these maps that'll show you where all the stuff is in your environment. And we'll finish off with some custom attributes and then a revisit of the ESX firewall that we talked about before. So if I go ahead and minimize this screen here, we're going to bring back up our virtual infrastructure client. And you'll see here now that we've got both of our systems that we've plugged in to the VIC. We've got two computers now that are serving inside of our Nugget data center. You'll see here one of them is 0.101, and the second one here is 0.102. And we have one virtual machine that is currently running inside of 0.101. And we're going to move a lot. We're going to work a lot with this Nugget 1 system and do some vMotioning with it a little later on and playing with it. And when we talk about virtual machines. But what we want to talk about first of all is this concept of hosts and clusters. When you look at the virtual infrastructure client, you're going to get a lot of different options of views that you can use for looking at various ways you can look in your infrastructure. And if you click on the view tab here, you'll notice that if we go to inventory, we have the option of looking, it's kind of like looking at the same data, but looking at it from 4 different perspectives. The first of which is this hosts and clusters. And this is, again, like I said, where you'll be spending a lot of your time because it's kind of the catch-all for the different, the data that you're most interested in. We also have the option of looking at virtual machines and templates and networks and data stores here. I want to start out, however, with this hosts and clusters because what it provides us is a nice integrated view of all of the machines, first of all, the servers that comprise our virtual infrastructure, and then all the virtual machines that are residing on those servers. When we get into the concept of clusters later on, you'll see that we even abstract that one level further and even take the machines away from the hosts so we don't even associate anymore machines with hosts. But we'll get to that later. What you see here is our Nugget data center. And as I said before, inside of the virtual infrastructure client, once you plug it into a virtual center server, the buttons change around. You start seeing different buttons and different capabilities. You'll see here that we have 2 systems. And if we click on the first system here, we have a screen that's very similar to what we saw when we connected directly into an ESX box. This is our general information about the server. These are resources available to it. What are the data stores it can connect to? We now have the ability down here to do some virtual machines. We can create a new resource pool, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We can enter maintenance mode, reboot and shut down. Our virtual machines are the same. This is now a virtual machine that is currently residing on this system. You'll see here that we can see the state for all of our virtual machines, and if we have more than one, we'll see them listed here. We'll see that they're powered on and that their status is green, that they currently have VMware tools installed, and the VMware tools is showing everything hunky-dory inside the machine. This is the amount of CPU and memory that that machine is currently using, and also what the percentage of that is, and any nodes associated with that virtual machine we can enter in here as well. If you need to make any changes to any of that information, you can. If you want, actually, if I go back to where we were, you can actually right-click in this location and from that location, do any of the things that you normally would by right-clicking on the machine as well. We could also do some resource allocation. We're going to talk about allocating resources a little bit later and how that works, but just understand that this is resource allocation. We can also view some performance graphs as well, and we're going to talk about performance and resource allocation a little bit later on. What I want to show you too is the configuration screen. Inside of this configuration screen, a lot of the settings are very similar to what we've seen before, but some of them are a little bit different. The first thing you're going to want to take a look at here is this tab that's called licensed features. And now that we're in the concept of a virtual center, now that we have the whole virtual center set up, we have a few more add-ons that are available for us that are not necessarily enabled right at the very beginning. And you'll see here now that we have our VC Nugget, nuggetlab.com. All of this is very similar because we're using the license server just like we did, and we have the ESX server standard. What we get when we move to the Enterprise Edition are all these extra little checkboxes. And one thing that you may want to check first and foremost is this check for vMotion, so that you will actually use a vMotion license and begin the ability to actually use vMotion. When we start actually configuring DRS and HA, when we create a cluster, at that point we'll actually consume the license for the DRS and HA. But you'll need to take care of this and be aware of this so that you're managing your licenses appropriately. Another one of the nodes that we're going to want to take a look at in this particular screen is this concept of virtual machine startup and shutdown. Now, I want to stop and step back for just a second and think about your network environment. You know, the network environment you manage every day, right? There are lots and lots of systems that make up that network environment. And when you eventually move those into the concept of virtualization, there's going to be dependencies on those. So, for example, like your domain controllers need to come up first before your Exchange servers come up, and your databases need to come up before your web servers come up, and all of that needs to come up after DNS comes up, because DNS, everything resides on DNS. And so there's a lot of these dependencies where different systems depend on other systems. And this concept of virtual machine startup and shutdown says, okay, if I have a catastrophic failure where I lose the entire ESX server, and I have 15 or 20 virtual machines on that server, I want to make sure that those machines come up in the proper order. Because if they don't, the dependencies might not be there. The dependent machines might not be there. If I choose the properties of here, now we only have one system in here, so if we have more systems, you'll be able to see the differences between the systems. But if we enable the allowing virtual machines to start and stop automatically with the system, what this says is let's actually bring up systems in a certain order. You see here now we have manual startup. This particular system is set to manually start up. If we wanted to move that so it was an automatic startup, we could move it so it started up automatically. Now, there's a second concept that we need to think about as well, and that's the idea that when machines actually power on, when a virtual machine actually powers on, that is the period in time when it consumes the most resources of an ESX server. Interestingly enough, booting a virtual machine is one of the hardest things you can do to an ESX chassis. And so what you want to do when you bring up a new ESX server is you want to make sure that you don't have all of these machines powering on all at the same time. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. I had a VMware server instance down in my basement that had about 4 or 6, I think it was about 6 virtual machines installed on it. And at the time, I had set each one to just start on power on. And without even really thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, I want to make sure they power on. And so we had a power failure here at the house. And when the power went out and came back on, the server went off and came back on. Yes, it's not on UPS. The server came on, and immediately all 6 virtual machines attempted to power on at the same time, which completely brought the server to its knees. And I think it took I don't know how long it took. It took a very long time for that system to finally bring all 6 systems on at the same time. So if you're doing this in the concept of a data center, if you have for some reason a host that dies on you, you want to make sure that all the virtual machines stagger their booting. And that's what this is for. This default startup delay here says for each virtual machine in this automatic startup or anywhere in this startup, delay the time period between the booting by a certain number of seconds. Here it says 120 seconds. You can continue immediately if the VMware tools start, meaning that if VMware tools begin and the machine's powered on earlier than 120 seconds, go ahead and power on the next machine. Same thing with shutdown. If you want to make sure that there's some delay between shutdowns, if you're powering off your ESX server, if you want to make sure you do it cleanly, you can do that here as well. 120 seconds, and then what is the action? Power off, suspend, shutdown, etc. Down here into the startup order, you'll need to notice that there are 3 different areas where you can put machines. The first is automatic startup, the second is any order, the third is manual startup. The items in automatic startup, you'll see will have a number next to them. And what that says is we will power those machines on, bam, 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 starting with the number 1 and moving our way down the list. If we have machines that are set down here for any order, we don't really care what order those machines are coming on or off. We can power them on any order. So automatic startup might be one of those good things for, oh, I don't know, let's say you've got, again, a domain controller, a DNS server. So DNS server first, domain controller second, exchange server third, database server fourth. And then in any order, maybe your web servers and maybe your video game servers or your music servers or whatever. You don't really care about those. So this is the idea of virtual machine startup and shutdown. The next thing on our list is what we call the security profile, or what we really would call the essentially the firewall of our ESX server. Now, anytime you install Linux, it installs a firewall unless you disable it, and that's no different in ESX because again, ESX is a reconfiguration of Red Hat, and the Linux firewall that we have actually is kind of neat in the way it's implemented inside of ESX because it provides a number of known connection types. Now, if you're not the kind of person to memorize what TCP or UDP addresses are associated with various services, you probably have a hard time understanding the concept of incoming connections and outgoing connections. You're like, oh, I got to remember what port SSH is and what port FTP is and all that stuff. Inside of ESX, however, we make this a little bit easier for you because if we click the Properties tab, we get the ability to see all of those inbound and outbound ports, and we can enable and disable the connections on our firewall so that we can allow or disallow the traffic to pass. You'll see here by default the SSH server port is open on our firewall, but if you want this host to be an SSH client, you'll need to actually enable it. I typically enable the SSH client because if you're using the SCP command, which is the secure copy command to transfer files back and forth on and off of your ESX server or between ESX servers, sometimes it's nice to be able to push and pull data off of your ESX server. We'll talk about the SCP command and a Windows tool called WinSCP a little bit later, but I like to enable that SSH client on there. If you're using SNMP, if you want this to be a server for SNMP, you can enable it there. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here that you can enable as well. You know, Tivoli Storage Manager. If it's going to be an NTP client, if this is going to synchronize its clock to an NTP server, you'll need to enable that NTP client here. Often that's a good idea too. If you're doing software iSCSI, we talked about this before. If you're doing software iSCSI, you'll need to be able to enable this iSCSI client so that it can make the connection outbound. FTP is these days FTP is almost deprecated because of SFTP and SCP. But if you're using FTP, you can make it a client here, or a Telnet client, or an FTP server. So all of these are available to you so that you can enable or disable the ports associated with the firewall on your machine. You can click the option here, and then you can configure any options for any of those clients here. You'll see here for the NTP client, you can start if any ports are open and stop the ports are closed, or start and stop with the system, or essentially make those changes depending on how you want it to be made. So that's the ESX firewall. And for the most part, most of these are actually ones that you're going to need. I'm going to click OK here, and so we've taken a look at the security profile, and we're going to skip over system resource allocation until we get to performance a little bit later. The last thing you'll see in here is advanced settings, and advanced settings brings up this big old box with a whole bunch of additional settings that you can potentially configure for your ESX server. For the most part, you will never need to change any of these advanced settings unless you are instructed to by VMware support. And there's a lot of settings in here that actually configure a lot of the very individual configurations for ESX. But again, unless you know what you're doing, or unless VMware support instructs you to do so, for the most part, you're never going to choose these advanced settings. Now, moving on to tasks and events, one of the really interesting parts about ESX, and if you're a compliance guy, if you're a government regulator and you're trying to figure out HIPAA compliance or SARBOX compliance or something like that, this particular screen inside of ESX really, really makes you excited. And that's because every time an event occurs or a task occurs that ESX completes, that task is logged into ESX's database. And so if you're a compliance guy, you're always trying to make sure that there is some sort of log that proves that someone did something on a particular system. And what ESX does is it says, okay, Mr. Compliance Guy, I can tell you every single action that is completed or was completed. I can tell you where it was completed, what target it was on, what the status of it was, who did it, and what the start and complete time was for that particular action. Now, again, if I have SARbox compliance, or if I'm a bank and I have an institution that deals with credit cards and I have PCI compliance, and my regulator comes in, my regulator can see this and say, yes, you have a control in your environment that proves that you are doing certain things, and it proves that a particular individual is doing certain things associated with that action. You'll see here, if we click on any particular action, we can see the task details, we can see what the target is, the reason, and the status, or who actually did it. You also see down here, and this is the screen that we kind of close from time to time so we can get more space because our screen is really small. But recent tasks are shown down here. Anytime we actually complete something, you'll see it actually complete here. Now, this is a useful piece to have, and again, the only reason why we've been dropping it down is so we've got more room to play. But for the most part, you're going to want to see this because some activities require a longer than typical amount of time. You know, as an administrator, you're used to hitting cancel at a certain point because you feel like it's whatever you're doing has gone into an infinite loop. Well, in ESX, sometimes these actions may take 2 or 3 minutes to actually complete. And so when you perform that action, the status bar for that action will actually increment to show you what percentage complete that particular action is. Let's say you're doing a vMotion. That vMotion can take 2 or 3 minutes sometimes. Or if you're creating a new virtual machine, or you're creating a new data store or something like that, you're going to want to watch this status here to make sure that the status is complete before you do your automatic system administrator thing and actually click the cancel button. So this is a concept of tasks and events. If we want to switch over here, we can switch between tasks and events by hitting this button, and this will actually show us all of the events that have occurred, which are separate from the tasks that have occurred. And so for those compliance people in our room, that's a very useful thing for the compliance people in the room. And there's actually ways where you could actually export the information from this list by choosing File and Export. Let's say that compliance officer says, you know what, I want a printout of this so I can have this printout to prove that you've actually done what you said you've done. You could export the events from this list by choosing the Export Events tab, and then you can actually export the last hour, or a particular range of events, or a particular number of matching events that match to a type of event that you're looking for. And so it's very handy for you to, again, prove what you've done on your ESX server. Now, obviously, with the concept of task, we have to come up with the concept of scheduled tasks. Now, scheduled tasks are a great thing in Microsoft Windows. I don't know if you use Microsoft Windows or cron jobs in Linux, but the ability to actually create a task that occurs sometime in the future so you don't have to be sitting at the console is just fantastic. And that's really no different than it is here in ESX. If we go down to the View and Scheduled Tasks node, if we move off of Inventory and off of Hosts and Clusters, we can actually take a look at the scheduled tasks that are enabled and create new scheduled task for our server. Let's say we need to do a scheduled outage at some point, or we need to change to reboot a Citrix server once a night. We want to make sure that we change that Citrix server so we always reboot it once a night. We can do that here inside of scheduled task. You'll see here that there's actually a relatively small number of tasks that are available to you, and that's because if you think about it from an ESX perspective, there's not that many actions that really could occur that you would want to schedule. We have the option to change the power state of a virtual machine, power it up, power it down, clone it, deploy a virtual machine. Maybe you know that a certain time of day you need to deploy another virtual machine to assist with load for a particular system that you have. You might know that you want to move virtual machines with vMotion. Maybe you know at some point in the future, you know that you need to move all the systems off of an ESX chassis so that you can perform maintenance, and you want to schedule that to occur in the future so you don't have to wait for it. Maybe you want to relocate a particular virtual machine. You just want to get it moved off to another location, or create one, or make a snapshot of one, or even add a virtual host. You can do that inside of this scheduled tasks node. Let's say I want to change the power state of a virtual machine. I can click OK here, and then I can choose which virtual machine I want to change the power state to. Let's say I want to power off this particular virtual machine at a particular time. So I'm going to say, okay, Nugget 1 daily power off, and then I can give it a description if I want. Then I can say, okay, every day at 10 p.m. I want to power off this virtual machine. It's just like Windows. Just you're familiar with the creating scheduled tasks in Windows. It's very similar to scheduled task in Windows. And so now we've got this Nugget 1 daily power off that occurs. It hasn't occurred yet, so it doesn't have a last run, but it is intending to run tonight at 10 p.m. If I right click, I can choose to remove that, or excuse me, to run that scheduled task right now to verify that it's going to work, or I can choose properties if I want to go ahead and change that scheduled task. All of these are available here inside of the scheduled tasks mode. So I'm going to go back here to view really quick, and we talked about the hosts and clusters and virtual machines and templates. We haven't actually viewed some of these, and I want to show you just really quick what they all look like. As opposed to the clusters and data centers node, the virtual machines and templates mode, it simply just gives us a list of all the virtual machines that are available. We're not going to look at the individual servers anymore. We don't care about the clusters that are available. We just want to see all of the virtual machines. And so this is very similar to what we've seen before, but it's virtual machine centric. If I change view again to just our networks, this gives us a view of all the individual virtual machine networks that are available on our hosts. This host only has a single virtual machine network. If I have multiple virtual machine networks, then I could connect those virtual machine networks, and they would be available here so I could view them network by network. And again, from there, the machines that are connected into that network, then I could manipulate based on where they are inside of that network. Lastly, the data stores. I can look at the machines that are connected into each data store that my infrastructure is connected to. Let's say the Nugget data store here. You'll see here I have one machine that is currently on that that is connected to that Nugget data store, and I have two hosts that are connected to that Nugget data store. And here's the status associated with those hosts. Here's the location. This is the UUID of the location for that, and what type is it, and how many hosts are connected, and also what the capacity is. So really, the idea here is, for the most part, you're going to be staying with the hosts and clusters view, but occasionally you're going to want to see different views of that same data, and that's the location from where you do it. We've taken a look at scheduled tasks and events, and we've seen administration before, because administration is where you look at system logs, and this is where we can see our license information and verify that the correct number of virtual machine or ESX hosts are connected into our virtual server. We can see the sessions under the sessions tab to see which users are currently connected in and manipulating our environment at any particular time, and also what roles. We'll talk about roles in a later nugget. But what I really want to show you is this concept of maps. Now, maps are just really cool. I just think they're really exciting, because what maps allow us to do is take a look at the connection points between all the elements that make up our virtual infrastructure and how they interrelate. And let's be honest, okay, it's kind of a gee whiz sort of thing. I mean, yay, I can see the map, but for the most part, it's kind of neat to see that, okay, Nugget 1, this particular virtual machine, is connected to this host, this ESX host, is on this virtual machine network, and it currently has two data stores that it's connected to. If I want to change what sort of maps I'm interested in, instead of looking at virtual machine resources, I can look at host resources. Now, if I drag over, I can see that 192.168.0.1 has three data stores connected to it, one network and one host off of it. If I wanted to add in the second host, the map changes slightly, and now I can see, okay, here's where my ESX chassis are, and here's how they connect to their resources. This map is auto-generated, and so there's not a lot that you can do to manipulate how the map looks, but as the size of your network begins to get larger and larger, this map actually becomes more and more relevant, especially when you begin to export the map into a JPEG file so you can post it on your wall. As your environment gets very large, 10, 15, 20, 25 ESX servers and all the virtual machines and data stores that connect to them, that's when the gee whiz factor comes out of the map, and it becomes useful for you to help you identify where everything connects to everything else. The last item that I want to show you in this nugget has to do with custom attributes. And this again goes back to the idea that as your infrastructure begins to get larger and larger, there's going to come to be a point when you need to add more information to assist you with the management of these systems. If I click under administration and click custom attributes, I get a kind of very basic screen that asks me to enter in the name of some custom attributes. Now what are custom attributes? Let's say that I want to list not only for all of my virtual machines, what is their name and their CPU and memory use, and what is their network they're connected to and their data store, but I want some more information about them. Maybe their role. Maybe I want to know what sort of role they provide in the network. Maybe I want to find out, I don't know, maybe I want to find out what their personality is. Maybe I want to find out what their favorite color is. Any kind of attribute that is interesting to me that will help me identify what my machines are and keep them straight in my head are useful when I add them into these custom attributes. And if you have a couple of virtual machines, you're probably not all that interested in custom attributes. But again, as you grow to larger and larger numbers of machines, these custom attributes grow helpful to help you identify what they are. I am essentially creating the column headers here. When I create a custom attribute, I create the column header that I would now later subsequently put in the data for. I'm going to click close here, and then I want to switch back to my default hosts and clusters node right here. So let's go back to hosts and clusters. I'm going to scroll over here, and I'm going to click on virtual machines. And we've seen this before. We've seen the name and the state and the status and the CPU and the memory. But now we have 3 new items in here, 3 new columns that we can add in data. Let's say this is a mail server, and its personality is a little grim sometimes. And maybe its favorite color, because it's a little grim, is black. So this gives me the opportunity to store more data about my machine. Now note, if you do go back to administration at any point and go back to custom attributes and say remove favorite color, say I want to remove that attribute, when I remove that attribute, I remove all the data associated with that attribute as well. So if you ever go back and choose remove for custom attributes, be aware that there is the potential for data loss if you remove those custom attributes. But be aware that they're there, and you have the ability to provide any amount of information about your virtual machines that you can. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about some of the, like I said, some of the miscellaneous components of Virtual Center Interface. And a little later on, as we get through the next series of nuggets, we're going to talk about the more interesting bits about vMotion and cold migrations and performance management and DRS and HA and all that fun stuff. But this gives us the opportunity to get an initial glance at the Virtual Center Interface and what it's used for and how we're going to be using it in the future nuggets. We talked about hosting clusters and the license features and how to configure some master configuration for VMs, including startup and shutdown. We talked about tasks and events and how to schedule tasks and those really cool maps, and then custom attributes and also how to manipulate that ESX firewall. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.